This is Leaders in the Trenches, and your host today is Gene Hammett.
Hi, this is Gene Hammett. I'm the host of Leaders in the Trenches. My question for you today is, do you want to learn how to increase performance for your team and yourself? Well, everyone I know inside of business wants to get a little added advantage to increasing performance, and your time here today will really be awesome because we're talking with Allan Stein Jr. Allan is a professional speaker. He's come from the world of sports, so he's worked with a lot of the best and the biggest athletes. Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, Kevin Durant. Did I say Dwayne Wade? I'm not sure about that one. LeBron James. But all of this was to talk about the performance and how do you get more out of yourself and your team. And we talk about that at detail today. We talk about some of the counterintuitive aspects to growth. And one of those is they crave coaches. So find out more details with my conversation with Allan Stein Jr. And here it is right now. Hi, Allan. How are you?
I'm fantastic, Gene. How you doing?
Fantastic as well. I was glad to have you here at Leaders in the Trenches. We're going to dive into your work and raise your game, but I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit about you and about who you serve and the work you do.
Sure. I've really had two sides to my career. Basketball was my first identifiable passion, and I fell in love with the game as a young kid. And I recently turned 43 a couple of weeks ago, and basketball is still a major staple of my life. But I spent the first 20 years of my career as a basketball performance coach, serving players and coaches at a variety of different levels, and had a chance to work with some pretty elite players and be mentored by some elite coaches. And then a couple of years ago, I decided to take everything that I'd learned from the game of basketball and translate that to the business world and help business owners and executives and CEOs use the same mindsets, disciplines, rituals, and routines that elite athletes use and show them how they can use those in business.
Well, I'm excited to have the conversation. I know you didn't name drop there, so I'll do this for you. Kobe is some of the people you've worked with, and LeBron, and who else could you share with us?
Well, here's what's neat about my career and that I've had a unique perspective. So there's about a dozen players in the NBA currently that I had a chance to work with when they were teenagers. They were 15, 16 years old. So this was before they made it big. So I got to see kind of that old before picture. And then I was able to do some work with Nike and Jordan Brand and USA Basketball, and I was able to work events for LeBron James, Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash. So I was able to see and observe players that were already established and already elite. So I got to see the after picture. So I have a pretty firm grasp from the before and the after of what it takes to be a high performer and a high achiever. And in high school, I was able to work with Kevin Durant, Victor Oladipo, who recently, unfortunately, suffered a season-ending injury with the Pacers. But I've been able to work with some really, really good kids. Well,
Allan, performance is a topic that I think every company is trying to figure out. How do we activate our employees? And I also want to go back to this. And how do we activate the leaders? And a lot of people think it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. Like you've seen a lot of coaches. What do you think about the whole activating the people and activating the actual yourself as a leader?
It's all in your mindset. And I believe, let's just use a CEO as an example. I think it's important as a CEO to have the mindset that my people don't work for me, I work for them. In fact, I'm a huge believer that the higher up you are on the org chart, the more people you serve, not the more people that serve you. And that attitude and mindset of servant leadership where your number one goal is to fill other people's buckets and to empower them to improve their performance, I think is the foundation to which everything else is built.
Now, you said empowerment, and that's a big part of my own core message when I go out and speak to organizations. How does a coach empower their players? And how does that translate into the business world?
It's important to know that we're always communicating. Even when we don't think we're communicating, we're actually communicating. And I'm not just talking about the nonverbals that everyone knows, body language and eye contact and tonality, but there's always an underlying message in everything that we do. And a perfect example would be if you and I are colleagues and I delegate an important task to you, I'm sending you the unconscious message that I trust you, that I believe in you, that I know you're competent enough to do this task as well as I could, and that's why I'm having you do it, which is clearly going to improve and deepen our connection. Whereas the other would be if I were to micromanage you. I give you this task, and then I stand over your shoulder, and I breathe down your neck. Now I'm sending a very different unconscious message that I don't trust you, that I don't believe in you. In fact, I think you're such a bonehead that you won't be able to do this unless I'm standing over your shoulder. And clearly that's going to erode our connection. And every single interaction we have with every single human being either deepens a connection or it erodes it. And empowerment is all about making sure we're deepening that connection. So I'm giving you tasks, and I'm supporting you, and I'm letting you know both consciously and unconsciously that I believe in you, that I care about you, and I know you've got this. And when we can make that, rampant within our organization, you see performance go through the roof.
One of your core messages, Alan, is about what's going on behind the scenes. Like, it's, when you look at Kobe Bryant, and I've watched some of the interviews and I've watched some of the stuff and read about him, and he's retired now. But when you look at some of these high performers, what are some of the key things you notice going on behind the scenes, the things we don't get to see other than, how they performed on the court?
And we actually call that the unseen hours. And when I was with basketball players, I would tell them, hey, this is when the gym lights are off. This is when the cheerleaders stop dancing and they turn the cameras off. That's when you make yourself a player. And it's the same in any walk of life. Most of our performance is determined when no one else is watching. And it's the rituals and the habits and the routines that we have. I would say the number one factor is that the best never get bored with the basics. That no matter how high of a performer someone is, whether it's a Kobe Bryant or it's an elite level CEO, they are committed to doing the basics during the unseen hours routinely. And that's not easy to do. And it's important to make sure that folks know that there's a difference between basic and easy. Those two things are not synonyms. If it was easy, everyone else would be doing it. And as you and your listeners know, we live in a world that often tells us it's okay to skip steps, that encourages us to circumvent the process and look for a shortcut, and is always pushing us to chase what's new and flashy and sexy and ignore what's basic. And that is a major pitfall, because the basics work. They always have, and they always will. And one of the reasons they're not easy to stick with is because they're usually boring and they're mundane and they're monotonous. But true greatness lies in your ability to stick with the basics. And I know as we're recording this, the Super Bowl just happened recently, but I find this comical because it happens every single NFL season. I saw it happen a few months ago, that when a team loses 2 or 3 games in a row, the coach comes on during the post-game press conference and says something to the effect of, at Monday's practice, we're going to get back to the basics. And of course, in football, you're talking about blocking and tackling and so forth. But that always makes me laugh. Not because I think I'm a better leader than an NFL head coach. Those guys are absolutely brilliant. But it makes me laugh because if their solution to the problem is to get back to the basics, then my question is, why did you ever leave them in the first place? If you think what's going to solve your problem is getting back to doing the basics, then never leave them. Make sure the basics are integrated into your own routine during the unseen hours. And in the case of a team, make sure they're integrated into your practice. And I'm a big believer that that's why groups like the New England Patriots and the Golden State Warriors, are constantly successful, because during every single practice, they spend time working on the fundamentals.
I read one time, and maybe it was an interview that Kobe had, and he talked about over the decades of his basketball experience, he always looked at the game film. I don't know if you had any experience with this, but I know I have my perception of this, but you being the insider to this community, why has he, 2 decades later, looking at the game film when he's done that every game, as I've heard, right?
Absolutely. I'd heard the same thing. And there's 2 ways to look at it. And game film, we can use that and extrapolate that to different metrics and things we could look at in business. But, there's the old adage that coaches say all the time, and that's, film don't lie. And there's a lot of truth to that. Kobe would watch his own performances because there's being able to watch it as a spectator to your own performance is going to be different than when you're actually going through it. And we can't see our own blind spots. That's why they're called blind spots. So being able to go back and watch film, he's able to see things that he wasn't able to see in real time. And then he can say, was the decision in this case to shoot the ball from the left elbow, was that the best decision at the time? Obviously, he thought it was in real time. That's why he did it. But now he can step back and look and see the big picture and evaluate whether or not that was the right decision. And when it comes to forming and developing a basketball IQ, this is one of the best tools that you have. But then he also uses film relentlessly, or did, he's retired, to study his opponent. And he would watch everything he could watch about the player he was going to go up against, to study their tendencies, to see what areas of the court do they shoot the highest percentage from, because as a defender, I'm not going to let them shoot there. I'm going to make them go to areas where they shoot a low percentage. So the fact that he was an incredible athlete, and had unparalleled skill, but he also was so strategic and so cerebral in how he played the game. That's why he'll go down in history on the Mount Rushmore of all-time greats.
Well, I'm glad you shared that with us, because we don't always have that insight from this. You have been doing this for a long time, bringing what you've learned from these athletes into the business world. And I want to ask you from the perspective of the coaches, because the coaches have a completely different way of, engaging. And what did you learn from coaches and how they get the best out of their team members?
There's two mantras that I learned very early as a coach that I'll be forever grateful for, because they've served me incredibly well, and they absolutely work in business as well. First mantra is the mindset of, it ain't about me, it's about you. And that goes back to what I said earlier, that it's not how many people serve me, it's how many people am I serving. But for a coach to always remember, or a CEO or an executive to remember, it ain't about me, it's about you, is a very important foundational mindset. And the other is that you have to connect first and coach second. It has to be in that order. That before you can ever try to teach someone something tactical, let's say shooting mechanics or footwork, you have to connect with them on a human level. They have to know that you care about them as a person first and a player second. Or in this case, you care about me as a person first and an employee second. Once you've created that connection, and we're constantly making deposits to deepen that connection, then and only then are they going to be truly open to whatever coaching you can give them.
One of the things that you talk about within your work is the performance gap. I'll give you my take on just setting you up here, but there's a difference between what we know to do and what we actually do. And, what would you tell the leaders listening in today from your sports experience of how do you close that performance gap?
And we have performance gaps in all different areas of our life. And you can have them in your financial life. You can have them in your health and fitness. You can have them in relationships. So the key is finding the most pressing performance gaps and figuring out how to close those. I'm a huge advocate of continual learning and development. And I devour books and podcasts like this and do everything I can to keep adding tools to my toolbox. But you realize, and I'll just use myself as an example and everyone else can self-reflect. If I didn't learn another thing for the next calendar year, the next 365 days, I didn't learn anything new, but I actually implemented and acted upon everything I currently know, my performance would go through the roof. That just shows you how many things there are that all of us know to do, but we're not currently do them. And in order to close that gap, there's a process that we have to go through. And I'll give you the abbreviated version because it's actually much more lengthy. And sometimes it takes half-day workshops for me to share this. The first thing is you pick one behavior that you want to change. Not several, you pick one. You need to have razor-sharp focus in what it is that you want to change. So you either want to find a behavior that you want to start, or you want to find a negative behavior that you want to stop. It goes back to that old adage that if you chase two rabbits, they both get away. So figure out one thing that you're going to do. Step two is be relentlessly committed to doing that behavior, either starting or stopping, either one, for 66 days. Why 66 days? There's some decent research out there that says it takes approximately 66 days to create a new habit or to groove a new pattern. I don't think there's anything magical about that number. I'm not implying that on day 67 your life is different, but I like that number because it's concrete, it's tangible, it gives me a goal to shoot for. It's enough of a stretch that I know it's going to be challenging, but it's also very doable. It's a hair over 2 months. So make the commitment for 66 days. And, you know, I'm old school. I've got a paper calendar here on my office desk, and I use a big red Sharpie. And if I'm trying to create a new behavior, I'm not stopping until I get 66 big red X's in a row. And then the third step to really close it all together is you need to recruit your inner circle. The people that you know love you and care about you, want to see you happy and successful, but people that will tell you the truth and hold you accountable. And you tell them about this one behavior that you're trying to start. And you tell them that, hey, I'm going to be committed to doing this for 66 days, but I have the humility to acknowledge that I won't be able to do this by myself. Will you please hold me accountable? Will you check in with me and make sure that I'm doing it? Will you call me on my stuff when I inevitably fall off? And if you can pick one behavior, be committed yourself for 66 days, and you can get those that truly care about you to hold you accountable. If you can do those three things, you got a really good shot at being able to change that behavior. And in this case, the context of what we're talking about, close that performance gap.
I kind of want to turn my calendar. I've got this old, I don't know if you guys can see this. Can you see this? Can you see
Love
that?
it. Yeah.
It's an old school calendar on the wall, and it shows the habits that I'm tracking up there.
I love it.
So it's, I believe in what you're saying, and I've seen this, and I've got my own inner circle. I didn't have the framework that you have around this because I know what works. This performance gap, though, is a serious problem inside of companies. And I'm going to go with the leader here. When you are really trying to help them identify what the one thing is, how do you go through that, Alan?
It's going to always start with self-awareness, and self-awareness is always an interesting one to me because one of the first steps to acquiring self-awareness is actually to ask others. And it's not asking some random stranger off the street. It's asking the people that know you the best. Because as I mentioned earlier, we have blind spots, and by definition, we can't see them. So what I always use as an example, let's say it's the skill of active listening. Well, I might believe that I'm a great active listener, but if you were to ask the 5 or 6 people closest to me, and they all say, no, Gene, Alan's an awful listener, well, then I'm probably not a good listener. I don't have very high self-awareness. I see myself different than the way the rest of the world sees me. So part of it is when you're trying to get someone else to close their performance gap is being able to shine the light on what it is and help in a compassionate and empathetic way expose what their blind spot is, what it is that they can't see. And it takes high emotional intelligence to be able to do that and do it in a way with grace and compassion that's going to get them to be open to closing that performance gap. Because if they have no interest in closing it, it doesn't matter how bad you want it. They're not going to close it until they want it. So it's speaking their language and getting them to understand how them closing that gap will benefit them. As human beings, we're all inherently selfish. I mean, that's wired in our DNA to look out for ourselves first. So the key is being able to show what's in it for them. Not if you close this performance gap, you'll make me more money or you'll make our company more successful. What's in it for them? And when you can paint that picture for them, then they'll have a much higher likelihood of wanting to close it themselves.
You're all about increasing performance. And so our audience here may want to, learn to increase performance for themselves. What is something counterintuitive or something that you learned in this journey of working with these phenomenal athletes?
The best crave coaching and they crave being held accountable. A lot of people get that backwards. They think that holding someone accountable or disciplining them, means you're angry at them or you're always busting their chops. And that's not true. Holding someone accountable is something that you do for them. It's not something you do to them. In fact, the best way to show someone you care about them is to hold them to a high standard and hold them accountable. And it's important to develop that type of mental construct in your company and in your business so that everyone on the team knows that when you hold them accountable to a high standard, you're doing it because you care about them. And you're doing it because you care about the organization and the North Star and the mission that you're going after. But that's one that I find a lot of people, they get confused. I remember having this conversation numerous times at the high school level, and I worked at some fairly elite basketball programs at the high school level. A player would say something to the effect of, why is Coach Jones always getting on me? And I say, you should be so thankful that he's getting on you. It means he loves you and he cares about you. You need to start worrying the day he stops getting on you, because that means he's given up. So that'd be one that quickly comes to mind.
I love that, because I can see how powerful that is, because a lot of leaders, they're probably listening to us today, don't have coaches. They don't have someone to really guide them and hold them accountable, and maybe call them on their BS, if you will. But you're saying that athletes, and we know this, right? Why does Michael Jordan need an athlete, or why does Kobe Bryant or Lebron or need a coach? Because they want to get better.
Yeah. And you can go look at, any incredibly high performer. I know he's making a comeback now, but back in his day, Tiger Woods was arguably the most dominant athlete in history. And even then, he had a coach. And I heard stories that he would crave for that coach to find a little bit of a hitch in his swing, or a little bit of something that he could improve, because that gave him hope that he could still continue to get better. Tom Brady has a coach, not just Bill Belichick. He has a private coach in all of these different areas of his life. And you could go down the list to anyone. I can guarantee you that before she goes on tour, Beyonce has a choreographer and a coach to help her with her dance moves and so forth. So every high performer has and needs a coach, because you can't see what you can't see. And that's what a coach is there to do, is to be able to help you see your blind spots, is to be able to ask you the right questions so that you can come up with the answers yourself, but is to put you in a position that you can raise your own performance and raise your game.
So we're with Alan here talking about increasing performance, and it really is such a great conversation. If our audience wanted to follow along with you, see what you're up to next. We didn't talk about the game, but we have your game, Raise Your Game, right? Your book?
That's the book, Raise Your Game, yes.
How can the audience get in touch with you?
If they're interested in the book, they can go to raiseyourgamebook.com. If they're interested in anything else I've got going on, you can just go to allansteinjr.com, and you can find me at Allan Stein Jr. on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of the major social handles. I love engaging with folks. So if anyone was listening or watching this and something resonated, I'd love to have some extended dialogue. Just shoot me a line on social, and we can chop it up.
Perfect. Had a great time with you today. Thanks for being here and being a part of Leaders in the Trenches.
Thank you.
Love this interview, because there's so much packed inside here. Because if you want to increase performance, if you want to raise to the next level, then you make sure to apply what Alan talked about. You want to make sure that you're showing up in the right way, doing the things that need to be done, closing that performance gap, and really getting the coaching that you need so that you can see your blind spots and move forward with intention. Now, if you have any questions about what you're doing and the clarity of that, I would love to get to know you. If you're listening to these podcasts, I do hundreds of interviews. We're coming up on just some special stuff that I can't wait to share with you. But also, if you just have a challenge that you want to talk to someone who's been through fast growth, who's understood or understands leadership and understands growth the way I do, then I'd love to get to know you. If you're listening in here, make sure you send me an email at gene@leadersinthetrenches.com or gene@genehammett.com. All right, that's my piece today. As always, lead with courage, and I'll see you next time.